Your brain right now, in this moment, is not the same brain you had this morning. Every experience you have, every thought you think, every decision you make, it is physically reshaping the structure of your brain. New connections are forming. Old ones are being pruned. The architecture of who you are is being rewritten in real time. Scientists call this neuroplasticity. And for most of human history, we believed it stopped working in adulthood. We were wrong. In the last 20 years, neuroscience has overturned one of its most fundamental assumptions. The adult brain is not fixed. It is not rigid. It is not locked into whatever patterns formed in childhood. It is, and this is the word researchers keep using, plastic, moldable, changeable, redesignable. And here is the discovery that changes everything. One of the most powerful tools ever identified for deliberately redesigning the brain is a practice humans have used for over 4,000 years, meditation, not as a spiritual concept, not as a wellness trend, as a neurological intervention with measurable, peer-reviewed, MRI-verified effects on the physical structure of your brain. In this documentary, we are going to look at exactly what happens, which brain regions change, how fast the changes begin, what the science says about long-term meditators, and, most importantly, what this means for you starting today. Because the evidence is more surprising than almost anyone realizes. And it starts with a number. What is neuroplasticity? The old model was wrong. For most of the 20th century, the dominant view in neuroscience was clear. The adult brain is essentially fixed. You are born with a certain number of neurons. You lose them as you age. You cannot grow new ones. And by your mid-20s, the basic architecture of your brain is set for life. This view shaped everything, from how we thought about recovery from brain injury, to how we approached mental health, to what we believed was possible for human growth and change in adulthood. The person who began to dismantle this model was a neuroscientist named Michael Merzenich. In the 1980s, working with monkeys, he discovered something that should have been impossible. When a finger was amputated, the brain region that had processed sensation from that finger did not go dark. It reorganized. It was taken over by adjacent brain areas. The map of the brain was rewriting itself. This was the first clear evidence that the adult brain was not fixed. It was responsive, dynamic, adaptable. How neuroplasticity actually works. At the cellular level, neuroplasticity happens in two ways. The first is synaptic plasticity, the strengthening or weakening of the connections between neurons. When neurons fire together repeatedly, their connection becomes stronger. When they stop firing together, the connection weakens. This is the basis of learning and memory. The second, and more dramatic form is structural plasticity. This is where the physical architecture of the brain actually changes. New neurons can be born. Existing regions can grow denser. Cortical thickness, the depth of the outer layer of the brain, can increase in specific regions. These are not metaphors. These are physical changes that can be measured with structural MRI, the same technology used to diagnose brain tumors and strokes. Researchers can literally see, on a brain scan, the difference between a meditator's brain and a non-meditator's brain, and the differences are significant. A 2021 meta-analysis published in Brain Imaging and Behavior examined 25 peer-reviewed MRI studies on meditation and gray matter changes, involving over 1,400 participants. The findings identified consistent structural changes in specific brain regions, with effect sizes ranging from moderate to strong. The 5 brain regions that change. Let's get specific, because this is where the science becomes remarkable. Meditation does not produce a vague, general improvement in brain health. It produces targeted, measurable changes in specific regions, each of which corresponds to a specific mental and emotional capacity. Here are the 5 most consistently documented. Region 1, the prefrontal cortex, your executive brain. The prefrontal cortex is the brain's command center. It handles executive function, decision-making, planning, impulse control, sustained attention. It is also the region most associated with what psychologists call working memory, your ability to hold information in mind and use it flexibly. Research from Harvard Medical School, and confirmed in multiple subsequent studies, found that regular meditation practice is associated with increased cortical thickness in the prefrontal cortex. In long-term meditators, this region is measurably thicker than in age-matched non-meditators. What does this mean practically? A thicker prefrontal cortex correlates with better attention regulation, the ability to notice when your mind has wandered and bring it back. Meditation, at its most basic level, is exactly this practice: noticing, returning, noticing, returning. And that practice is literally building the neural tissue responsible for it. Region 2, the amygdala, your alarm system. The amygdala is the brain's threat detection center. It is the structure responsible for the fear response, the fight or flight cascade, the emotional reactivity that hijacks clear thinking in moments of stress. In chronically stressed people, the amygdala is overactive and structurally enlarged. It fires easily, stays activated longer, and communicates more powerfully with the rest of the brain. The implications are significant. A less reactive amygdala means a longer gap between stimulus and response, between something happening and your reaction to it. That gap is where choice lives. That gap is what changes behavior, relationships, and decision-making at the most fundamental level. Region 3, the hippocampus, your memory center. The hippocampus is essential for memory formation and emotional regulation. It is also one of the only brain regions where neurogenesis, the birth of brand new neurons, has been confirmed in adults. Chronic stress is toxic to the hippocampus. Elevated cortisol actually destroys hippocampal cells. This is part of why prolonged stress impairs memory and learning. And it is why meditation, by reducing the cortisol response, has a protective effect on this structure. Multiple studies have found increased gray matter density in the hippocampus in meditators, consistent with both reduced stress damage and possibly increased neurogenesis. A 2025 study published in Nature Communications Biology, which examined participants before and after a 7-day meditation retreat using fMRI and full plasma proteomics, found significant changes in neural connectivity and signaling pathways linked to neuroplasticity and neurotransmission. Region 4, the insula, your inner body. The insula is less well known to the general public, but it may be the most fascinating region of all. It is responsible for interoception, your awareness of what is happening inside your body: heart rate, breath, hunger, pain, emotional sensations in the chest and gut. The insula is how your brain knows what your body is feeling. The 2021 Brain Imaging and Behavior meta-analysis identified the right anterior insula as the single most consistently changed brain region across all 25 meditation studies, with a strong effect size of approximately 0.8 to 1.0 on Cohen's D scale. Why does this matter? Because the insula is the seat of self-awareness, the ability to sense your own internal state, to notice that you're anxious before it overwhelms you, to feel an emotion as a physical sensation rather than being swept away by it. This capacity lives in the insula, and meditation, which involves sustained attention to present moment experience, including bodily sensation, directly trains and develops it. Region 5. The Default Mode Network, Your Mind Wandering System. The Default Mode Network, or DMN, is a set of interconnected brain regions that activate when you are not focused on a specific task, when you daydream, when you ruminate, when your mind replays the past or rehearses the future. The DMN is, in effect, the biological substrate of the narrative self, the ongoing inner story of me. In people with depression and anxiety, the DMN is overactive. It runs on a loop, the same thoughts, the same fears, the same stories, cycling without resolution. The 2025 Nature Communications Biology study found that meditation significantly decreased functional integration in the default mode network, with a p-value of 0.00009. This is not a marginal result. This is a robust, highly significant reduction in the connectivity and activation of the brain's rumination system. How fast do the changes begin? Here is the question most people ask when they encounter this research. How long does it take? The assumption is usually years, decades, that these structural brain changes must require a lifetime of dedicated practice. The data says something very different. 10 hours, the first threshold. A landmark study by Yi-Yuan Tang and colleagues published in Neuroplasticity in 2020 examined what happens to the brain after just 10 hours of mindfulness training in complete novices, people who had never meditated before. Using a longitudinal randomized control design, they found measurable gray matter changes in the posterior cingulate cortex, a key hub of the default mode network. After only 10 hours of practice, 10 hours, not 10 years, not 10 months, 10 hours total of meditation practice was enough to produce detectable structural changes in the gray matter of the human brain. To put that in perspective, if you meditate for 20 minutes a day, you cross the 10-hour threshold in 30 days. 4 weeks. White matter changes. Earlier work by the same research team had already found white matter changes in the connectivity pathways between brain regions, within just 2 to 4 weeks of mindfulness training following 5 to 10 total hours of practice. White matter changes affect the speed and efficiency of communication between brain regions. They are the neural equivalent of upgrading the wiring of your brain. The long game. What happens at 10,000 hours? If the short-term effects are this significant, what happens with decades of practice? Research on long-term meditators, people with thousands of hours of practice, shows effects that go considerably further. A 2024 paper in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews reviewed studies finding that elderly long-term meditators showed increased gray matter in regions most vulnerable to age-related decline, including the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. The researchers noted something striking. These were exactly the regions most susceptible to aging and Alzheimer's disease. The long-term meditators showed a pattern of brain preservation, neural resilience against the normal deterioration of aging. What the skeptics say. Science is not a collection of inspiring findings. It is a process of testing, questioning, replicating, and revising. And the neuroscience of meditation, while genuinely exciting, is not without its critics. It is important to understand where the evidence is strong, where it is preliminary, and where legitimate scientific debate continues. What the critics note. First, many meditation studies have small sample sizes, 20 participants, 30 participants. Effects that appear significant in a small study sometimes fail to replicate at larger scale. Second, most studies compare meditators to non-meditators. This raises a selection effect problem. Perhaps people who meditate long-term are simply different in ways that also affect brain structure. More disciplined, less anxious, more health conscious, independent of the meditation itself. Third, the gold standard of research, the randomized controlled trial, is difficult in this domain. You cannot give someone a placebo meditation. You cannot blind participants to whether they are meditating. Why the evidence is still compelling. These are legitimate concerns, and serious researchers in this field take them seriously. Here is what makes the body of evidence compelling, despite these limitations. First, the convergence. The same brain regions, prefrontal cortex, insula, hippocampus, amygdala, DMN, appear across dozens of independent studies conducted by different research teams in different countries using different meditation traditions and different imaging technologies. When independent lines of evidence point to the same targets, that convergence is meaningful. Second, the longitudinal RCT data. Studies like Tang et al. 2020 used randomized controlled designs, assigning participants to meditation versus active control groups, and still found structural brain changes. This is the strongest possible design, short of complete blinding, and the effects held. Third, the dose-response relationship. More meditation practice correlates with more pronounced changes. This dose-response pattern is one of the strongest indicators of a real causal relationship in biological research. What this means for you. Let's bring this out of the laboratory and into real life. The research we have discussed is not abstract. It has concrete, practical implications for how you function, how you respond, how you age, and what is actually possible for your brain starting today. What you can reasonably expect. Based on the strongest evidence available, here is what the research supports for a consistent meditation practice, defined as 20 minutes per day. Within 4 to 8 weeks, measurable reductions in perceived stress and anxiety, consistent with reduced amygdala reactivity. This is not just feeling calmer. It is the neural basis of emotional regulation beginning to shift. Within 3 to 6 months, improvements in sustained attention and working memory, consistent with prefrontal cortex strengthening, the ability to focus, to resist a distraction, to hold complex information in mind. All of these begin to improve. Over 1 to 2 years, structural changes in gray matter density and cortical thickness consistent with the MRI findings we have reviewed. These are longer-term changes, but they are cumulative and they compound. Which type of meditation? A natural question. Does it matter which type of meditation you practice? The honest answer is, different practices produce somewhat different effects, but the foundational changes, reduced DMN activity, prefrontal strengthening, amygdala quieting, appear across multiple traditions. Focused attention meditation, where you sustain attention on a single object like the breath, most directly trains the prefrontal cortex and attention systems. Open monitoring practices, where you observe whatever arises without selecting a specific focus, may more broadly affect the insular and interoceptive awareness. loving kindness practices show particular effects on empathy and social brain networks. The most important finding of all the research we have covered today, there is one finding I want to leave you with, because I think it is the most important. It is from the Tang et al. 2020 study, the one that found gray matter changes after just 10 hours in complete beginners. These were people who had never meditated before. They had no prior experience, no training, no years of dedicated practice. And after 10 hours, 30 days of 20 minutes per day, their brains had physically changed. This is the finding that changes the framing entirely. The neuroscience of meditation is not about what happens to monks after decades of retreat. It is about what happens to ordinary people, people like you, within weeks of beginning a simple, consistent practice. The brain you have today is not the brain you are locked into. The science is clear on this. What remains is only the question of what you are going to do with that knowledge.